20 years ago, Terri Schiavo became the center of a prolonged legal and ethical battle between her husband and her family over whether or not to remove her feeding tube, which was ultimately done in 2005, leading to her death. Joining me today on the podcast is Bobby Schindler, Sean Clark, and Dr. David Gibbs III. Bobby Schindler is Terri Schiavo's brother and the president of the Terri Schiavo Life and Hope Network. Sean Clark is the chair of the Terri Schiavo Life and Hope Network. And Dr. David Gibbs III is the founder of the National Center for Life and Liberty and the lead attorney for the Terri Schiavo case. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Dr. David Gibbs, for being here. And I just want to go into a little bit of the background of talking about Terri and how this whole situation came about. So, Bobby, can you just explain just about Terri, just a brief description of, growing up with her and how this whole situation came about up until the point when David Gibbs, started, helping you advocate for Terri?
Well, we were born outside of Philadelphia.
Just move that map. Yeah.
Yeah, our family was born outside of Philadelphia. Terri was the firstborn. I was in the middle, and then I had a younger sister, Suzanne. There was my mom and dad, Mary and Bob. They raised us. Typical, we're a middle-class family. Went through the parochial school system up in the Philadelphia area. I guess it was 1986. My dad decided that he was going to semi-retire and move to Florida. So he and my mom and Suzanne moved to Florida. Terri had married Michael Schiavo in 1984, a couple of years prior, and they actually followed my family down, so they were also living in Florida in 1986. I moved down in 1987, so by that time, the entire family was living in Florida, just kind of going through our day-to-day. Nothing extraordinary. We were just doing what families do. My dad was enjoying kind of his retirement. Michael Schiavo took a job in the restaurant business. Terri was working in insurance, and I was at the time kind of jumping around. I just graduated college and looking for a full-time career type job. And it was 1990, just a few years after we moved to Florida, that Terri was home alone with Michael in their apartment in St. Petersburg, and I got a call from my dad telling me that Michael had just called him, telling him that Terri had collapsed. And we were coincidentally living in the same apartment complex, so my dad said, why don't you get over here and see what's going on? So I did. When I got there, Terri was on the ground, unconscious, still breathing, but unconscious. And it was soon thereafter that the paramedics arrived, and I didn't really suspect anything seriously wrong with Terri. I'd just seen her a few hours earlier. But when the paramedics got there, I knew right away something was wrong, because they took out the paddles, started trying to resuscitate Terri, and I basically stood there in shock. So Michael Schiavo seemed to be shocked as well that Terri was in this condition. Seeing her a few hours earlier where she was normal, just didn't suspect anything being wrong. So now where she was, looks like they were trying to save her life. But not to go through all the details of that night and some of the events that happened afterwards, but her collapse, she went several minutes without oxygen and sustained a pretty significant brain injury. But she, during the course of the next couple of months, started receiving rehabilitation and starting to improve. But unfortunately, just a couple of years after that collapse, which was in 1990, Terri was 26 years old at the time. Michael had kind of shifted heart, and went on this pursuit to end her life. And this started in really 1993, went to court in 1998, went to trial in Pinellas County, Florida, in front of Judge Greer in 2000, where Michael had petitioned the court to remove Terri's feeding tube, which was the only thing keeping her alive at the time, nothing else. She was still dependent on others for her care, but the only thing sustaining her was food and hydration, because she had difficulty swallowing and needed a feeding tube, because of her brain injury. So I went to trial in 2000, and week-long trial. Judge Greer, Michael, as I said, petitioned the court to remove her feeding tube. Our family objected and was trying to stop Michael from doing that, prevent him from doing that. Wanted to bring her home and care for her and Terri home. We were unsuccessful. Judge Greer sided with Michael, ruled in his favor. So our family immediately appealed that decision. That's really when Mr. Gibbs entered the picture. He soon thereafter came in as legal representation. About 5 years, our family fought, went through many different appeals, Supreme Court. Eventually got the attention of the Florida legislature, Congress, the Vatican. Millions of people worldwide were all kind of involved. Now in Terry's case, it just grew, snowballed in this huge media ordeal. Mr. Gibbs became our lead legal counsel. Probably the last few years of Terry's case. 2005, all the legal options were exhausted. March 18, 2005, her feeding tube was removed, Terry's, and then 14 later she died of what was described as marked dehydration. And it was March 31st, which we just recognized our 20-year anniversary. Mm-hmm. And our family, in response to Terry's death, started the Terri Schiavo Life Network, and we now serve as patient advocates, helping other families in similar sexual circumstances to try and prevent what our family went through, to prevent their other families from going through the same type of situation.
I was in I was in college when this all happened, so.
Are you saying we're old?
No, I mean I knew about it, but I saw it in the news, and what I saw portrayed was what the news portrayed, which wasn't it wasn't necessarily factual. It was just what the news was reporting.
Yeah, I left out an enormous amount of details, obviously, because there was so much from the beginning to end of his case. I mean, there was just a lot of information, a lot of details.
And it was like it was just this combination of the medical world, the legal world, the Governor Jeb Bush at the time was weighing in, the president. I think the Pope even made some comments, and then you have the media. So it was like kind of captivating the world, and everyone had an opinion on what to do or what they thought was the right thing.
There was a couple interesting things as you think about it. It was one of the early media cases. Okay, we now have where it's almost like information overload. There's all networks and channels and online. But you had where, maybe O.J. Simpson, that was kind of the first one, and you had like Michael Jackson, Scott Peterson, all California, all criminal. But then all of a sudden, Terri wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't in California. It was in Florida guardianship probate court, kind of a non-exciting courtroom. And her case captured the attention of the world. So they were watching that. Then you had the advent of the internet becoming more accessible to regular people. So the Schindlers were able to communicate, like with many people remember the video image of the balloon or Terri talking to her mom. And so the internet allowed this to get out. I mean, I remember we were hosting terrysfight.org, which was one of the early websites. And I mean, millions of people at once were trying to get into it. And it was back in the dial-up AOL days. It would crash and we'd have to get it back up. And so the world was watching what was going on. But with all that attention, and Marcos, you already said it, the media wanted to put out a narrative that was just flat false. They lied. It was like she's brain dead. I don't know why the family's fighting to keep her alive. They didn't understand that Terri Schiavo was as alive as any person listening to this podcast. That number two, she didn't have any disease or injury that was expected to end her life soon. I mean, we can deal with cancer, Alzheimer, heart disease. We know there's diseases that end life. But Terri was disabled but healthy. So she's alive. Nothing's ending her life. And then Bobby already said it, but all she needed was food and water to stay alive. So what we had in this case was, can you take away food and water, ordinary care in our opinion, from a patient that is alive and not expected to pass from any other disease? And that was the issue. And Bobby articulated it, but I think the horror of the thought that for 13 days, which, by the way, demonstrates a pretty strong desire to live. You, with your medical background, knows most people without food and water will pass 5-6 days. They kind of give up. Terri's a fighter. Terri wanted to live. And she went a long time, 13 days, without food and water. And then on March 31st, when she passed, it was heartbreaking. And you're right. The Pope at that time had indicated full support for Terri. Matter of fact, it was interesting. The media that was here all jumped on airplanes to fly to Rome because at that point the Pope was going to pass and he had a feeding tube inserted. And many thought it was symbolic support of Terri Schiavo. But the Schindlers, and I hold Bobby in huge esteem. He's a great young leader and done phenomenal. But I think back to Bob and Mary, a mom and dad, and Bob is now passed, and I think really died of a broken heart. His health collapsed significantly after Terri died. But Mary continues to work with Bobby in the foundation. And you just had a mom and dad saying, look, just let us take care of our daughter. And to have a healthcare system, to have government, to have the courts all step in and say, no, we're going to end her life under these circumstances. One of the things I really respect that Bobby has done is this could quickly get lost in information overload, right? You know, bad things happen. Oh, well, let's move to the next sad story. But this is something that my children who are now adults or grandchildren or others are going to grow up and live with. You all in the healthcare industry. I mean, the shifting standards of what can we expect when we walk into a hospital or emergency room. We have now moved into what I label a quality of life lie. And I'll just say what that lie is. If you don't have sufficient quality of life, your life isn't worth living. And in a way, we're discriminating against every disabled person, every injured person, and we're looking like almost playing a godlike role to decide who is worthy of life and who is not. I believe what American law was built on. I believe what Judeo-Christian ethics are built on. I believe what we as a society should aspire towards is every life has value. And that while we certainly don't want to keep a dead body alive, we understand that. But when someone is alive and their life is not ending, for us as a society to say their life isn't worth living, that's the slippery slope that Terri Schiavo's case has put us on.
And just to clarify, this was not like the typical, like, you know, I see patients on hospice, and this was not like a patient where you know that in the next week.
No, well, let's say what hospice requires. You know this, a doctor to make a diagnosis, and it's a guess, we get it, that this person is going to pass in 6 months or less, generally. I mean, so cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, horrible conditions, multiple ailments. Okay, we have an 80-year-old with multiple ailments. There's things to look at, right? But when you have a 41-year-old woman who's able-bodied, disabled, but not cancerous, not heart disease, not any disease, and we just say, you know what, we just don't think her life is a sufficient quality of life to remain alive. That was Terri's case. And so, you know, I always want people to understand, I mean, I was in the room when Terri would, you know, say I and love to her parents. She would tickle her dad's mustache. She was disabled. Bobby'd tell you that. He visited her often. They were close. But she was alive and she was expressive. And where do we get to decide as just other human beings when someone else's life is worth living? We all want quality of life. I want it, you want it. Everybody in this room right now can walk, and we're all thankful for that. Okay, we're all thankful for the ability that we can be ambulatory. But if something were to happen where I was in an accident, had a disease, injury, I couldn't walk, you could look at me and you could say, you know, last time I saw Mr. Gibbs, he could walk. His quality of life has gone down. He's no longer able to walk. And you'd be right. My quality of life would be more difficult to be in a wheelchair or to be unable to walk. But that doesn't mean my sanctity, my specialness, my identity has changed. And one of the things I love about the Life and Hope Network and what Bobby and Sean and others are doing is they're raising a empathy, a compassion for less than perfect people. The disabled people matter too, that we need to recognize, you know, really what the Bible says, you know, what you've done unto the least of these, you've done to God himself. And having that heart and that compassion for people in tough circumstances versus that judgmental, they're not even worth living.
Mm-hmm. So what was I'm interested in the healthcare workers that you interacted with when Terri was in the hospital. Did you get any feedback from them? Were any of them shocked at what was going on? Were they just kind of doing, following the doctor's orders? What was your interaction with the healthcare workers, doctors,
During the
nurses?
time of her starvation death, or dehydration?
Yeah, yeah.
You had a range. I mean, I guess most of the staff were just doing what they were instructed to do. If I remember correctly, Mr. Gibbs, some of the nursing, some of the people that worked there um, didn't want to be there during that time period. And Terry was, they either, I don't know if they quit or just said they weren't going to work.
Like conscientious objection. They
But I don't know they got fired or anything, or they just quit or just taking a leave of absence during that.
well, and remember they had moved Terry to a hospice care model, okay, without a disease. So some of these, and by the way, some amazing people. Okay, so I don't want to say there weren't some excellent people involved, but they're surrounded by death and people that are expected to die soon. That's the culture, okay? But there were definitely some that were, I mean, they would tell you they opposed what was happening and they hoped we would win. And I had one situation, I met a lady that was a nurse that knew Terry, and she said, I got a bone to pick with you. I was like, oh, great. Because, it's hug or duck, right? You say Terri Schiavo, people go, that's great. Or were you that dumb lawyer that did that? Okay, so, I mean, you get it both ways. But at the end of the day, she said, I read your book, and I want to tell you something. She said, you did not adequately describe Terri Schiavo. And I said, what do you mean? She says, I went in and I helped her get bathed. Terry would pick out her clothes. Terry would tell me things. Terry was my friend. And I said, well, I apologize. I wish I'd talked to you before I wrote the book because I never was involved in Terry's care or changing her clothes. But I said, I'm thrilled to hear that, I expressed her energy and her reactions. And she said, you way underestimated it. Terri Schiavo was alive. And she said, I quit because I wasn't going to be part of her murder.
The other, working in the hospital, I still work like in acute care hospital. And so that is,
And by the way, thank you, both you and your wife, for your service to people in need, because I do think healthcare professionals are unsung heroes, but they're in a tough system.
yeah, I appreciate it. That is something that, comes up from time to time. Like, what if you have these moral objections to how your patients are being cared for, or just even like going through COVID? There was just a lot of, things that I didn't agree with how patients were being treated and labeled, and how even the healthcare workers were being treated and labeled if they weren't on board with everything. And I guess maybe what is someone from the legal, I mean, not like legal advice, but what can a nurse or a doctor do? Is there can they be fired for that kind of thing if they object to care, do you know? Or
Great question. Okay, and I will go legal here. You do have a right to conscientious objection. So, like if someone were to say, I religiously oppose abortion, I don't want to, perform any abortions. You let your employer know. Your employer then has a little evaluation. Can they accommodate that? Now, I'll use an example. If you're in a big hospital with lots of divisions and you're a nurse, and obviously nurses are in high demand, you could probably be reassigned and not be involved in any abortions. If you're working for an abortion clinic and there's one doctor and that's all they do and you object to it, they can let you go. Because what they would say is accommodating your religious belief, even though it's important to you, is impossible. We can't. This is what we do. Okay, we don't have any place to put you. So it's kind of a balancing analysis. Can you have you notified them? Is it a sincere belief? Can they accommodate? Now, you get into different areas, at what point can you say, I don't want to be involved in something? So, you're rushed into an emergency surgery and you're doing something in there. They're going to say, we can't accommodate religious beliefs in emergencies. Police officer rushes into a, X-rated business. He said, oh, wait a minute, I object to this morally. Well, he might, but a crime's going. He's got to go where he needs to go. So it's always that balancing. But I do think what people need to be aware of is the old default in healthcare is gone. Okay, my son is studying to be a doctor, and others in healthcare that I've spoken with, it used to be, we're going to keep you alive, and then you got to tell us if we're going too far. Now, healthcare has moved to, we don't want to do too much unless you push us. And so, like, what Bobby has to counsel families to do and what the Life and Hope Network has to do is almost be an advocate. Hey, let's give this person a chance. I mean, Bobby, you just had a baby in Tampa that they were ready to let go. And what happened in that situation?
Well, I think we're really seeing an increase in the quickness that the determination to stop treatments are taking place. We get a significant number of calls from families where their loved one might sustain a brain injury, say, for example, and within days, sometimes hours, the hospital or the doctors will come back and start pressuring the family to stop treatment. And so if they contact us, we become advocates for time, basically, and we try to help the family delay any possible deadline as far as terminating treatment to give their loved one a chance to recover, respond to treatment. And that's what happened in Tampa. We were just involved with a case. An infant was born, and within hours of being born, it went through some difficulties during the pregnancy, and the baby sustained a loss of oxygen, an anoxic brain injury. And within hours, the doctors were already painting a grim picture. And the baby wasn't going to improve. There was no chance of any kind of significant hope for recovery. Really putting pressure on the family, the parents, to stop treatment. And the families just weren't willing to give up that quickly. And they wanted time. We were put in touch with the family, put a team together, and basically we were just doing everything we could to delay what we thought was going to be a really difficult fight with the hospital, because they were kind of digging in their heels and weren't really offering the family any paths to try and help the baby. Well, miraculously, they gave one more EKG. The parents asked for another EKG about a week after, the first one, which was not long after the baby was born. And the EKG came back and showed brain activity. And fortunately, the hospital did a 180, and they saw that the baby was starting to improve, and ordered rehabilitation right away, which was, give glory to God that the hospital did that, the doctors did that. But that's in many cases that's what we do with the families. We fight for them, because all the brain research we've been seeing the last few years, they're seeing more and more that the brain does need time to see if in fact it can respond to treatment or rehabilitation, and decisions are being made much too quick, life and death decisions, to terminate care within a time period where the brain still could be healing from that initial accident, wherever it might be. Every brain injury is unique to that person. So the person, they might need more time than others, and they should be afforded that time rather than, families having to fight within a short period of time, make a decision whether they're going to, continue or not continue treatment. So, and it all much of we see, financial reasons that are driving these decisions, costs, insurance companies putting pressure on hospitals and patients or families to stop treatment. Then you have the whole organ donations.
I just saw that you posted something a couple of days ago on your website about, and I have read that headline over the last couple of days, and I don't know much about it. Maybe you've looked into it more. I don't know if that's coming from because I never really worked in the ICU, which is usually where most of that stuff tends to happen, is in the intensive care. And I don't know if that's coming from certain hospitals or the procurement companies that are going in and facilitating all of that. Do you know much about, because that's kind of like a breaking story.
Well, I think it's, you look at it where we have such a demand for organs today, so many people that are on these waiting lists, And you can see the connection between these quick decisions when someone does sustain a brain injury to stop treatment so they can start the organ procurement process. So I think, yes, there's a very strong relationship between these quick decisions and organ donation companies, the OPOs, which are government-run, basically federally subsidized organizations. They're nonprofits that are, behind these organ procurements. And so, not to get into the minutia of the organ procurement industry, but it's $1 billion a year business. There's a huge demand for organs. You have these quick decisions when someone does sustain a brain injury, and it all when you look at, just generally speaking, there's definitely a connection between these decisions and organ donations and this whole brain death diagnoses that are taking place. So much there, and then you see what's come out these past couple of weeks with HHS, actually, Robert F. Kennedy doing a full investigation on these decisions being made, even though some patients are showing signs of activity, showing signs of life, but yet they're trying to procure these persons' organs. So there's definitely some issues in as far as organ donations, and something that we're kind of dealing with when we get these calls from families and these quick decisions are being made.
Well, and Bobby's nailing it. Time is your friend when you're trying to assess whether someone's going to improve or not. The old thinking, and we had so many neurologists that were standing with us and speaking into the Terri Schiavo case, but the old thinking was the brain was like a computer hard drive, okay? If it got warped, if it got bent, it was kind of broken and you were done, and that injury was permanent. But the new thinking, and this has been established in the research, is that the brain is much more like the internet. It can sustain damage in an area, but it will actually reconnect or find ways to and it's really in the design of God and the miracle of the brain, but it can actually kind of fix parts of itself, but it needs time. So if you go in and say, here's an injury, and yeah, we're going to use the old thinking, it's just not going to get any better, people get very fatalistic. But what Bobby stresses, and I totally agree with, is, if your loved one's going to pass, they could pass in 2 weeks. They don't have to pass today. And if God intends to take them, God can certainly do it at any point. So we're not going to be able to keep someone alive indefinitely, but at least give your loved one the time to see where you're at. And some of the research is kind of, in my mind, exciting and yet sort of heartbreaking, because some of these people get warehoused or ignored or not visited, and they're now discovering with some of these sophisticated MRIs that they can express joy and have happy memories. And so you just don't know what's going on inside of a human brain and mind and the miracle of it all. But if you are in a situation, so let's just say you're at the hospital, and they're saying, rush, decide, sign here, do this. Sometimes the smartest thing is just to slow down. Now, again, we're not trying to be obstinate. If there's a situation that has to be done, it needs to be done. But from a standpoint of make sure, I'm a big believer that good people with good information make good decisions. And I think people go into hospital emergency settings oftentimes unprepared. I mean, Terri was 26 when she was rushed to the hospital. You don't expect that. And if you don't have the information, if you don't have the background, if you don't have the resource of talking to a Bobby Schindler or contacting an attorney or working through experts or people in your family, a lot of people just look at the hospital staff and just say, well, what do I need to do? And not a nurse, not a doctor hands them a form that says sign here. And they just sign documents to pull life support from their loved ones or to remove they basically just gave up. But they didn't even know what they signed. And so what I'm encouraging folks is, be thoughtful, make real decisions and do it over time, and make sure that there's a phrase in the book of Proverbs in the Bible, in the multitude of counselors. There's safety, there's wisdom, there's all the good things that are promised by God. But make sure when you're in the healthcare world that you don't just listen to the first person at a desk that tells you what to do, but talk with people that have some expertise that can help you through this, because the system itself now defaults to this quality of life. It's just not worth it. Whereas there's a family in Tampa that now has a baby that would have been in a cemetery and is now in a crib at home. That's a powerful testimony to that life. And then you also got to think about, what's that child going to do? Is that child going to be an inventor, a teacher, a doctor? Is that what contributions does that child bring to this world that would have been lost because we as a society didn't give them the time to let their brain heal? And somebody says, well, what if they're always disabled? You know what? Doesn't mean they don't bring value to this world. Doesn't mean they don't bring joy. Doesn't mean they can't contribute. So I think we just have to be careful that we don't become arrogant in our blessings. You know, because I can walk, because I can talk, because I can think. Yes, that's all blessings. Thankful that I have them. But if I were to lose any or all of them, do I still have value? And I think we have to be careful to recognize that human beings do have an inherent value.
So Bobby and Sean, you've worked with people and families trying to advocate for them with your foundation. What is some advice you would give to a family that is in a situation? Because you know that the hospitals have attorneys and they have ethics committees and they make decisions.
Loss prevention, risk managers. I mean, they're all jumping in.
So the average person that comes into the hospital and they're in the situation where they can be in shock, or they can be just they're in a bad situation because they're in the hospital. What's the best thing a family can do that's trying to advocate for their loved one that may be in a similar situation to what Terri was? I know time, you said to try to delay and just take some time to think about it and get good counsel and advice. But are there a couple things that they can, like, do they need an attorney? How do they go about that?
Well, it all depends, and I'll start. Maybe Sean can kind of comment after. But patients have rights, families have rights, and and many families really don't expect to be in that situation. I mean, our family, we never suspected Terri had any issues. Everything, one day everything was kind of just living our lives, so to speak. Next day we're trying to save Terri's life. So many families just don't, the old saying, it's never going to happen to me until it does, right? So I think if families would take the time, or individuals take the time to understand their rights if they ever are in that type of situation. But what family does that? I mean, what family sits down and says, okay, if there's ever if I ever get admitted to the hospital, what do I need to know? But there are ways to find those things out. Hopefully, just not too late once you're in that setting. So, our first impulse is to trust doctors in hospitals because they think that we're looking out for our best interests. And I'm not trying to paint a broad brush here, because there are some wonderful facilities and doctors out there. But many times it's just a kind of luck of the draw, so to speak. If you do get admitted to a hospital, if you're going to get the care and treatment that you should be receiving in whatever particular situation it is, for whatever reason, the hospital doctors might decide, just I'll give you all kinds of examples. I already did on a couple, that they're going to withdraw treatment or stop treatment or not even offer treatment. So it's kind of a quick, tricky question to answer. What can families do? The best thing you can do is just educate yourself, inform yourself, what your rights are if you're ever in that situation. And if that's not the case, then do everything you can to pump the brakes and find and learn that if you are in that situation, kind of learn what are your rights before you start go to other resources, and don't always take the word of the doctors and the hospitals where it's happening, and seek information elsewhere to see if the hospital is acting appropriately, or if you do need help, if you do need outside counsel, do you need other input, so you know that your loved one is being treated properly. Because there's all kind of nuances, there's all kind of situations where you do have rights, and perhaps you don't know whether the hospital or the doctors are honoring those rights or not. So, but I will say this: I wouldn't sign anything I mean, if you're in a situation and they start throwing forms in front of you, I wouldn't sign anything until you fully understood exactly what it is that you're signing.
I've I've handed. No one reads the forms.
Right.
No.
They just,
No one. I mean,
Well-
there it's explained to them. This is
Yeah.
what you're signing, but no one that there's maybe
Well,
not no one, but there's very
the
few
titles
people.
are even confusing. I mean, living will. The word living is in there, and generally it's a pro-death, kill me, and I won't sue document. So, like, people can be very confused. And to tie into what Bobby said before Sean jumps in, you got to know that medical diagnosis. Okay, so sometimes families need to ask for second and third opinions or another test because, like, you can find things out. So, I mean, if your loved one is truly dying, there may be a different analysis than your loved one has a chance at life. So, good medical information. But then, number two, you got to determine who is the decision maker. You know, we get calls at our office, you know, I'm the brother, I'm the aunt, I'm the cousin. Well, we find out there's a wife or there's a mother or there's a decision maker. Well, you got to realize you can't just go into the hospital and trump the decision maker. So sometimes you got to work through the decision makers. Third thing to think about is with young people, who should be the decision maker? So, like, you have a daughter that gets married and now she's driving on her honeymoon with the new husband and they have a car wreck. And all of a sudden, mom and dad rush to the hospital. They put their whole life into this daughter. And the hospital only wants to talk to the husband because the parents have no legal rights. And the parents go, what? I've been there my whole life for this child. This is the Schindlers. Why are you talking to the 1 hour old husband? Well, he's the legal decision maker. So sometimes you may want to think about, okay, maybe a wedding gift is that your daughter signs a healthcare power of attorney designating mom and dad and new husband as decision makers. So things to think about, and again, Bobby said nobody does think about it. It's hard, who's going to imagine that car wreck? But who would imagine 26-year-old beautiful young Terri would collapse in her apartment? Hopefully of natural causes. Maybe it was we don't know. Something happened. But at the end of the day, at that point, here you have, the Schindlers were largely cut out, by a husband that was acting in his own interests, both financially and then ultimately morally, and then to the life and death of Terri. And so the medical, who is the decision maker, who should be the decision maker, all thoughts to think about, as you look at it. But Sean, you've been in all this and known Bobby a long time. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I would say for your average listener, become your own advocate. It's almost like a consumer advocate type approach. You're never going to become a subject matter expert. You're never going to have 10 years of medical school and residency. You're never going to be able to match that knowledge level. But they always try to disparage people that try to advocate on their own behalf or interject knowledge. They'll call you TikTok doctor or you just ask Dr. Google. Of course, you're not going to be able to access the same level of knowledge that a medical professional with years and years of training and background has. But you can understand the basics of what you should be getting for what your condition is. You can even look up the standards of care. You can make sure that it matches. You can make sure that being what you're told is following those standards of care. Do those standards of care make sense? Or are there alternatives? Or have you tried the first line treatment? Is there a second line treatment? These are things that you can go and you can talk to your doctor about, and you can say, well, I tried that. It didn't really work for me. What about this second line treatment? That's a lot different than you going in and saying, well, this cream or whatever, it's not really working for me. What else can you give me? And the doctor just says, there's not much else. Because they might know they've only got 10 minutes and they didn't think, well, I can try this second line treatment. You have to go in and you have to be very purposeful for how you represent yourself. It's a shame. I think a lot of people, especially, David was talking about the old standards, we just sort of gave ourselves to the medical system. We said, these people are really knowledgeable knowledgeable, know what they're doing. They have my best interest in mind. I'm just gonna do exactly what the doctor tells me. Follow. We even call it doctor's orders. I'm gonna follow the doctor's orders. It's not that you shouldn't do what a medical professional tells you to do and rely upon the knowledge and consultation they're giving to you, but it's incumbent on you to have general knowledge to be able to say, is that right, or is that the course that I want to follow? Because ultimately it's your body and it's your life. And the doctors in our post-insurance insurance world, they just don't have a lot of time to delve into your medical records, and it's not uncommon for them to mess up. It happened to me a few months ago. I was primary care doctor, condition, wanted to write me a script for something that was completely contraindicated for what I suspected the underlying vector was, and I said, hey, I don't think that's right. And he said, oh yeah, you're right, let me give you this instead. It wasn't anything other than just a quick oversight, because for what it was, that would have been the treatment path that you would probably choose 9 out of 10 times. But for this, the underlying vector, it was probably contraindicated or would have flared it or made it worse. And so I just said, hey, I don't think that's what you need to give me. What about this? And he said, you're right. Let me look up an alternative. It took him 2 minutes, but that might have saved me, a lot of headache, a flare of the condition. Who knows? So there's so much knowledge out there. I'm not telling everyone that they need to be an expert. They need to substitute their 60-second take on what they Googled for a medical professional, but have an idea of what kind of treatment are you in for? What should it look like? What path should it follow? And if you can't advocate on your own behalf, have an advocate for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you definitely need to advocate for yourself, have a family member in the room all the time. I see some patients who, you just never see anyone in the room. And, nurses and doctors, and they're human, they make mistakes, but I think that having, if at all possible, having a family member in the room is so important, just to pick up on the little changes in condition in your loved one.
And even just courtesies, like you pull the rope or you hit the button or whatever the way you get nurses' attention. Well, they're slammed, they're busy, they've got things to do. And all you need is a cup of water, or you need help to the bathroom, or whatever the situation might be as a patient. But when you have a loved one there who can say, oh, I'll go get your water, or I'll go to the nurse's station or I'll help you get to the bathroom, if, again, medically appropriate. So my point is, yes, if you are there and you are able to, with your spouse, with your kids, with anyone, I'm a fan of presence improves care, because they all of a sudden go, okay, we have a family member that is watching. And not that changes what you do for people that aren't being watched, but it does show oh, we want to go maybe a little extra mile. There's a little extra level. And then, a lot of these hospitals have moved to the insurance model in-out, again. And so now people are being sent home that may not be ready to go home. So if you don't have some family support, some people that can help you, it can be very difficult to, continue your therapy or treatments. And so I do think, family involvement, and we're in let's be candid, Marcos, breakdown of the family, right? Marriage, divorce, people don't like each other, kids don't like their parent. I mean, it's a sad world where we see so much dysfunctionality within the family. But if you have relatives that you trust and that share your values, having them being part of your support team is so huge.
And I think important point, again, to your average viewer, if you want to take away from what this conversation, it's okay to ask a doctor questions. In fact, you should be asking questions. And the more informed your questions are, if you're not sure or you want to know if there's an alternative, don't just go along with what they tell you. If they say, this is the treatment, this is what you have to do, we're going to do it to you, say, what does that mean to me? Especially the more invasive it is. I had a friend, he had to have a biopsy done, and they told him it was going to be 3-4 stitches. It was close to his face. He really didn't want that. It was probably going to be a scar. So he asked the question, is there an alternative? Yes, there was. It was a skin scraping or something. I don't know the exact procedure that was done, but So instead of making an incision and doing an invasive biopsy, they were able to take a skin scraping, no scarring, minimally invasive, and they were able to get the same test result. Now, the test result might have not been as good or as high of a chance of figuring out what the underlying cause was, but you could do that test and you could always do the biopsy later. In medical efficiency, if you're the doctor and you say, I only want to see this patient once, you say, well, we'll just cut him open, we'll take the biopsy, we'll send it off to the lab, and that has a 95% chance of diagnosis. The skin scraping's at 60-70%. But you as the advocate, you have to walk around for the rest of your life with that scar. You have to deal with healing that wound for the next 3 or 4 weeks. So ask the question, because that's how you can get more knowledge and you can make sure that that path of treatment is correct for you. That's why it's also important for you to know generally what is going on with what your condition is, so that way you can say, hey, I don't feel comfortable doing that, but you can propose an alternative. Or if that doctor doesn't want to do the alternative, go find one that will listen to you. A good doctor will always listen to you, I think.
So one of the main reasons I started the podcast was just to help educate people. Even like people that are inside of the healthcare system, we don't know everything that's going on. Like one of the big things is insurance. I don't know anything about health insurance, but yet I work in the hospital. So it's to just help educate, but then also to get the perspectives from people who are outside looking in on the healthcare system. So maybe just each of you take a minute to let people know what does the healthcare system, in your perspective, what are they doing well? What can they improve upon, or what needs more attention from the healthcare system? And then maybe just how do you go about getting the improvements done?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, and again, my son is a orthopedic surgeon training as a resident in Dallas, and I believe doctors, nurses, people like yourself, Marcos, your wife, do incredible work. So I hold healthcare in high esteem, the workers. But I do think the system is getting way too much government control, way too much insurance control, way too much money management control. And I think that is decreasing the quality of actual care that's being provided. And so you mentioned, insurance, you walk into an emergency room, first question people ask, what's it going to cost? And healthcare is that one world where they don't tell you, or they say 100,000, but if you have insurance, we'll only charge 10,000. I mean, it's a crazy pricing structure. The other issue is there's not a vaccine or a drug for everything. And there are some medical professionals that have just gotten into what I call the big pharma mindset, which is, okay, here's my list of pills, here's my list of symptoms, let's mix and match what pill do we slap at this person. And by the way, grateful for pharmaceutical advancements and the good meds that we do have available, but there's not a pill for everything. And I think sometimes we have to be careful in healthcare that we don't get lazy with just another script, another pad. Everybody makes their money. It's in, out the door. Patient goes to the pharmacy, more money is being made, and it becomes a financial system where this person is forever on these drugs. And now, so it's almost like a revenue stream. So as I look at it, I think it's important, and we've talked about advocating and articulating, but recognizing that there are some very powerful factors at play with insurance and government and big pharma being three of them, that you kind of have to stand up against at times to make sure that the pro-life or the right type of care is being given to yourself if you're able to make your own decisions, or being given to your loved one if you're the decision maker. So, Bobby, I'll bounce to you, or Sean. Hey, Sean, when did you first connect with Terri's case? Like, what do you remember?
Yeah, so in my perspective is I met Bobby about 10 years ago when he asked me to join the board. I was working for a nonprofit called the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education at the time, and I joined more just as sort of a administrative subject matter expert to join the board. I had no real background in anything more than general pro-life, disability rights or due process. My wheelhouse was freedom of speech at the time. And I remember back to when I was just a college graduate in 04, 05 when Terri's case was on the news. And I remember how hard it was to actually find information on the case because the media, as David said, would slant it as, oh, this is a dead woman. They just going to unplug her. She's going to die this peaceful death over a few minutes and, pass. And she's just a vegetable. I heard the word vegetable more than I think my health teacher in 8th grade used it on the news every night. And I was younger. I knew nothing about the case. I actually had to go in and read the court filings to get a balanced perspective on what Terri's condition was. And I thought to myself, my gosh, they're going to starve this woman to death. And a starvation death is one of the worst deaths that you can have. Any survival expert will tell you, you can live 3 days without water, about 2-3 weeks without food, but it's a terrible, terrible existence. Especially without water, your body starts shutting down. It wasn't, we're gonna unplug grandma, she's brain dead, she's, a machine's keeping her alive. I'm like, they're gonna starve this woman to death. And I think I was listening to someone on talk radio, it might have been Rush Limbaugh or something, just someone on the AM dial, back when you dial in your radio. And I remember they said, if they manage to kill this woman, it's going to be a generation, but this is going to be what ushers in the culture of death. And I think that was a watershed moment that shifted the culture to where our valuation of life sort of changed. And it's like, how much is your life worth living? And does it meet whatever metric is being given? So your life is worth, 3 out of 10 and 2 out of 10 keeps you alive today. It really shifted to where the burden used to be, will keep you alive, and life means something to now. Life just, it's great while you got it, but if you don't have it or you don't meet the quality of life that someone who has quality of life thinks that you ought to live, it's not worth living anymore. I do think that Terri's case was, when we look back and when history looks back, they're going to say that was one of the ones that really changed how people view life. Because I remember I worked in an office that was, libertarian, some liberals, some conservatives, and a lot of the more liberal-minded people would say, well, she has a right to her body, and you do, but you also have a right to life. And I don't think the media did a very good job at the time articulating exactly what that meant to remove that feeding tube. Some channels and some communication outlets did, but mostly the line they said was, well, this is Michael Schiavo. She wanted to die if she was disabled, so he has the right to speak for her because she can't speak, and they're just going to unplug her, and that's that. And that wasn't true at all. And I remember at the time thinking, like, my God, they're going to kill that woman and they're going to murder her. For the lack of a better word, they're going to murder her. And, the case went out of the news in 2005. And then I met Bobby about 10 years later. And I said, Bobby, I'm more than happy to join your board. This is a cause that I should probably get to know more about. But that did leave a lasting impression on me, even though it was about 10 years later before I even met Bobby in person. I had only ever seen him, or I saw a very young David Gibbs on television, but I had never met either of them in person before. But just as a complete outsider, that was my perspective. And just the amount of, I won't call it disinformation, but selective information that was being put forth, and how the case was framed, and how, obviously Michael Schiavo was trying to drive the narrative, how successful they were at driving that narrative, even through Congress and the federal courts. If you go in and you read the filings, they were still able to drive that narrative up until the very end. And a lot of the later challenges didn't involve the removal of the feeding tube directly. They were collateral challenges. But it really, really changed, I think, how the public viewed disabled people that require some type of support. Not life support in a breathing machine or something that's actually keeping them alive, but some type of care beyond just the standard kind of care that a hospital would provide to someone who might be, have a broken leg or something like that. I think that there was a major culture shift around '05, and we're just seeing that today come to fruition. And that's why I think that Bobby's work is so important, because he can exemplify why the culture of life is important and why it is something that we need to fight for, because human life means something. We're only here once. Death is irreversible as far as we know, and we don't live forever. And I think, life is worth living, and it's not to me to dictate what is an acceptable quality of life to someone in general, to say you are a 4 out of 10, so therefore you are not worthy to be here anymore. We're only accepting 5 out of 10s. That gets to be a very dangerous slippery slope. I always hate the slippery slope.
How do you even set that scale? Is it because they can work? Is it because they can contribute? Is it because of how old they are? You start looking at any scale is going to have criteria where people are in and out, and it's almost like where you're playing God with other people's lives.
Yeah, and that's what it is, because any scale is going to be arbitrary in nature. It's going to most likely be fluid. You can see this in countries that have single-payer systems. Cost of care goes up. All of a sudden, standards of care change, and you can get cancer treatment in England up until you're 70. You're 70 and a half. Too bad. Now, don't cite me on that. I'm not sure if that's, but you can sort of see it bleeding into it, especially when you have a single payer that says, I've got this bucket of money to spend on healthcare for our society, and the cost went up. So how can I lower the cost? You reduce the amount of care. And what's one of the most expensive areas of care is for people that require long-term support or have something like cancer. So if you are an administrator and you say, I got to balance the budget this year, that's the easiest way to tinker with it.
You talk about a scale. If someone authors the scale, it can be changed.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
they can say, well, today it's this, but tomorrow we're changing it. So
I'll be facetious. We don't need any more lawyers. So why do we treat a lawyer? David Gibbs has a healthcare issue. We don't treat lawyers because we don't need them anymore. But we do need nurses. So if they're sick, we'll take care of them. And somebody says, well, that's crazy. That's draconian. That's bizarre. But that is, once you start playing the godlike role in deciding who lives and dies. And then I also warn folks, like the West Coast has a lot of right to die states. But then you move into the right to die quickly becomes the duty to die. So now all of a sudden some senior adults being pressured. And so it is a very dangerous slippery slope. And Bobby, we're about out of time, but you want to land the plane with some final comments and thoughts as you've heard all this, my friend.
Well, I don't think I could add anything more to what Mr. Gibbs and Sean said as far as the question you asked about healthcare. I think it was perfectly articulated. But I will say this: I think it's really important to make, and I'll touch back on I think what you mentioned, Mr. Gibbs, is anticipating the fact that you might not be able to speak for yourself. It is vitally important that you identify a healthcare advocate, someone that will stand it. Sean talked a lot about self-advocating. Well, what if you can't speak for yourself? Then you need to have someone step in and be that self-advocate for you. And I'm not talking about a medical directive. This is different from a medical directive. This is appointing someone to be your advocate, speak for you if you're unable to speak for yourself. I am a strong opponent of medical directives because they're a snapshot of how you feel when you're filling that out, and that could change the next day. It's much more safer and effective that you have someone to step in that you've appointed to speak for you if you're unable to speak for yourself, as I said. So it's vitally important. I think if anybody takes away anything, what can they do to help? I mean, because doctors often, I think as Sean had said, operate within the standard of care. And you might need to go outside the standard of care to get the treatment that you want. And that's where if you're not there to speak for yourself, you need an advocate to understand these things and to fight for you and to fight for the treatment that you need. So I would really stress the importance of identifying someone that knows your principles, your values, that would speak for you. And you do this legally. You can fill out a form to identify who that person is. So that's kind of what I would say in closing. And that will go a long way to help at least protect yourself to continue fighting for your life if you can't do it yourself.
Before we go, can you just let everyone know how they can get a hold of each of your organizations, or if you have any social medias you want to let people know about, or websites or anything, just so people can get in contact with you? If they...
And again, we work all over the country, and National Center for Life and Liberty, if they need any legal questions, issues, challenges on this, NCLL, so National Center for Life and Liberty, ncll.org. And I'll bounce to Bobby, but let me just say thank you for your service as a nurse, you and your wife, and your investment in healthcare, your investment in educating people. I know this comes at a personal cost to you, time, energy, expense. So thank you for giving us the privilege of being on your podcast and what you're doing to help others. But if they need to reach out on the legal side, ncll.org. So Bobby?
And thank you too, Marcus. Appreciate your time. Lifeandhope.com. We have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week National Crisis Lifeline if you're ever in a situation where you need help. Ethical help, a resource to help a loved one, or just if you have general questions, you can go to lifeandhope.com to contact us. That's lifeandhope.com. We also have a very active Facebook page. We're always posting information on there, cases, involvements, just stories,
Articles, education,
right? Everything, and it's the Terri Schiavo Life and Hope Network Facebook page, so you can find it pretty easily. So I would urge people to become a supporter, and it's a way they can educate themselves as well on to the problems and the issues and the help that they could receive if they need it.
Okay. Thank you, all, Sean and Bobby and Dr. Gibbs, for coming on. I think what took place with Terri was very important and shouldn't be forgotten about. So thank you for taking time out of your day to come on. Do you want to?
I just wanted to also say thank you for having us and appreciate your time.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.